Hello, Mr. Harris.
Hello there.
I'm John Hammond.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Well, nice to meet you, too.
I've been
Are
asked...
you living in Tokyo?
Pardon me?
Are you living in Tokyo now?
That's right.
Oh, that's great.
I've been asked by the staff of Epic Sony to do the interview, although
that's wonderful.
That's
great.
They have prepared the questions for me, so I guess I'll just fire away if you're ready.
All right, do that, please.
How did you get involved in producing Stevie Ray Vaughan?
He came to me about a little over 2 years ago. What happened was I heard the tape of his concert in Montreux in the fall of 1982, and I was crazy about it. And so I was aware of him, and then his manager, Chesley Milliken, who used to work for Epic, and who was an old friend of mine, came over, and Stevie and I got along instantly. So he had a tape, and I thought it should be rebalanced, so I rebalanced it, and that was the first album. That was Texas Flood, and then I did the second album here in New York. The first album had been done originally, I think, mostly in California.
How is it that you came to do Couldn't Stand the Weather?
Couldn't stand the weather. It was a terrible storm. This was last spring in New York, and the weather had been entirely terrible. And so Stevie, who was a sort of instant songwriter, wrote Couldn't Stand the Weather.
And what was your capacity in that recording?
I was the producer.
Which, in his case, would involve doing what? Like, what sort of advice and counsel did you give him?
Well, helping to pick the studio, balancing the musicians, telling them it was too loud, which is usually the case, and urging him to do as much live recording as possible. There's no tracking on this album. And I'm very proud of one thing, and that is that Tin Pan Alley, which is a 9-minute cut, was done on the first take live.
What sort of differences do you see between him and other young artists you've worked with?
Well, a lot. I mean, he's into the blues, and of course I've always been into the blues. I have a son who's a blues singer, and he was on the same program with Stevie in Montreux 2 years ago, and they're friends. And it's all sort of incestuous, I guess, if that word is translatable to the Japanese.
It certainly is. How about your son? What's he doing now, just out of curiosity?
Oh, he's playing all over the country. He's busier than he's ever been, I think.
Huh.
He's on the road right now.
I see. Getting back to Stevie, how did you feel about working with an artist whose age is quite a bit younger than you? Than yours?
Quite a bit younger. Well, I tell you, I'm not unused to it, because I've been working with a lady who was 88, and that was Alberta Hunter, and I've been working with kids, and I'm doing a whole lot of new things for CBS, and a lot of these are not exactly teenagers, but they're in their early 20s.
Why did you yourself decide to do the actual production job on Stevie Ray Vaughan as opposed to actually calling up another producer and have him do it?
Because there are not too many producers who are into blues. And I guess I really am one of the few. I guess one of the real reasons that Stevie sort of wanted to work with me is that I was the guy who had found Charlie Christian back in '39, and I think Charlie Christian was undoubtedly Stevie's favorite guitar player. And so this was sort of a nice continuation for me. I happen to love the guitar.
And you've established the careers of various artists. Well, I don't know exactly established, but at least got people like Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen going. How did
That's right. What's that?
How did this all start? How do you find these people?
Well, usually I go out and find them, and I'm supposed to have ears. I'm a classical musician by training, and I played in the string quartet for many years, but I really loved jazz, so I got into jazz early on. I cut my first real big band jazz records back in 1932 with Fletcher Henderson's band, and there's rarely been a better band than that. And of course, I did a lot of work with Count Basie, and I got Benny Goodman's band together originally. And I mean, jazz is my bag, I guess you could say, although I'm not a jazz musician myself.
How come you were able to see the talent in, say, a folkie like Bob Dylan or a rock and roller like Bruce Springsteen?
Well, in the first place, they got something to say. They're not just folk artists or rock artists. I mean, Bob Dylan happened to be a poet. Bruce Springsteen is a poet. And I guess maybe I was attuned to that. Also with Bob Dylan, he was sort of a rebel. He was against the establishment, and so was I. And I've recorded Pete Seeger and a whole lot of other so-called subversive people. And I've always gotten a kick out of doing it. And with Bob Dylan, I didn't realize how great he was, obviously, when I first heard him. But as soon as I got him into the studio, I knew that I was going to stick with him no matter what happened.
You sort of raised a whole generation, including Dylan, Springsteen, Aretha Franklin. Which are you most proud of?
I'm awful proud of Springsteen. I'm awful proud of Stevie Ray, to be perfectly frank with you, because, again, he's continuing the blues tradition, you know. And the artist I always wanted to record, and I was about a few months too late, was Robert Johnson. Because I had gotten his records when they first came out in 1937, and I knew that this was the greatest blues singer I was ever going to hear, and he was. I've also recorded Big Bill Broonzy and all sorts of traditional blues musicians. Also, I happen to be one blues fan who is not put off by rock, because I have a feeling that rock and R&B really continued the blues tradition.
But somebody like Stevie Ray Vaughan is very unusual in the...
He sure is. Well, of course, I've been present, you know, at the Edgar Winter and Johnny Winter's sessions and everything, and although they were good, they didn't thrill me the way Stevie did.
Do you think there's still a market for blues? Because not that many people...
Well, there sure is, because the second album, Couldn't Stand the Weather, has just gone gold, and there's obviously a huge market for it, and he's just begun, because both these albums of Stevie's have sold, you know, way up there without a single, and in this day and age, this is absolutely unprecedented. We didn't go out to make a single. We went out to make good music. And I think we did. I think Texas Flood is a masterpiece, too.
Do you think people are just buying the album because he's a guitar hero or because of the blues?
Well, he is perhaps the next, you know, he's going to have the same kind of an impact, I think, and he is having it already as Bruce Springsteen is. He's a real rocker.
Next question here is that they wonder if you have some sort of special technique for plucking these diamonds from the rough, as it were. You know, in other words, this may...
I'm just lucky. I've been around an awful long time. I've cut my first record 53 years ago. And you know, I just happened to be around at the right time. I was around when Billie Holiday first came to New York from Baltimore back in 1933, and I figured that she was it, and I turned down Ella Fitzgerald because I was so sold on Billie, you know, and I think I was right. Although, of course, Ella's wonderful, but I mean, I didn't have, I hadn't worked with vocalists before, except for Bessie Smith, and of course, Bessie was the greatest of them all.
And of course, everything you've done so far is common with each other in that it's all very, very American.
I think this may be true. Although I've also recorded Joseph Szigeti and Walter Giesecke and a lot of classical artists and the Stuyvesant String Quartet, I haven't given up what I also love too, because I also love chamber music.
What about it's out of your field, I suppose, but what about the success of all the British artists in America? Do you think they're based...
I'm thrilled with it. I'm thrilled with it. For one thing, a guy like Mick Jagger and the Beatles, a lot of their material was based on Robert Johnson's material. In fact, Mick Jagger and the Stones tried to copyright Robert Johnson's songs, and we were able to prevent that.
And how about some of the more recent stuff? More recent British stuff.
British stuff? I don't listen to too much of it because I think, frankly, although that's a marvelous British artist, I happen to like the homegrown product in America an awful lot. Listen, there's wonderful music in Europe. I mean, the best jazz band in Europe right now is from Czechoslovakia. It's the Radio Orchestra in Brno, B-R-N-O. And the Gustav Brahm Orchestra, I think, outswings almost any American swing band.
What sort of other artists are you involved with right now?
Oh, I'm involved with all sorts of people. A lot of young artists. I'm back with CBS now, you see. One of the things I'm doing is digging up new talent and old talent. One of the older talents I'm recording now is Mrs. Bob Hope, who was a wonderful jazz singer 52 years ago before she married Bob. And I got her into the studio last week, and I'm thrilled with her.
How did this come about?
This came about because I guess I hadn't ever heard her. And I went and heard her, and I fell in love with what I heard. I'm doing an album with her in January.
How about other new artists like Stevie Ray Vaughan?
Well, I got a couple of wonderful young ones coming up. There's a Canadian boy called Peter Hammond, Hamon, no relation, and he's living in L.A. right now. And I'm doing all sorts of things. You don't want to talk about me. You want to talk about Stevie. I'm old-fashioned and old hat, you know.
That's not true.
Well, maybe not. I hope not. But I like, I think most people think of that. They don't want to hear old stories repeated.
Not at all, not at all. Well, what sort of stuff are you doing for Stevie now that the album is done?
Well, we're doing another album with Stevie in February down in the Bahamas in Chris Blackwell's studio.
Why did you choose to do it there?
He chose to do it there. It's nice and warm. He couldn't stand the weather in New York in the wintertime, and he can certainly stand the weather in the Bahamas.
And you will be producing that one as well?
I will be producing that one as well, that's right.
What do you think you have in mind for that one? More live-type recording?
No, we're going to have extra instrumentalists, for one thing, because Stevie's really into jazz. One of the things I'm hoping to do is a duet album with George Benson, who was another great guitar player whom I brought to CBS some years ago. He's with Warner Brothers now, but I'm hoping to get him back with CBS.
There's been some criticism leveled at Stevie for his voice. Some people say it's not quite up to par. Would you agree?
No, I like his voice because it's honest. A lot of people wouldn't like Bruce Springsteen's voice as a voice. It just happens to express what Bruce Springsteen feels and loves. And what I really like in an artist is, that direct communication with an audience. And Stevie can do it. And obviously, so can Springsteen. I mean, Springsteen is just unbelievable.
What do you think?
And I can't wait to get Stevie and George into the studio together.
Is there a possibility of that?
Yes, indeed there is. That'll be in the spring. When he's with another label now, so I have to tread delicately there.
But you're confident that it will happen?
I think it will happen, yeah.
What kind of thing? What type of thing do you think could come off?
We'll do good jazz, the kind of thing that George hasn't been able to do for years and years. And Stevie loves jazz too, and he hasn't been really able to fulfill his jazz chops yet, But he's going to. He's going to go down in history as one of the great guitar players, I think.
Well, it seems like he already has a surplus of strengths. What sort of weaknesses in him do you want to improve on?
It's not weaknesses. I just want to, the more he lives, the better he's going to be. It's very hard for an artist, to come, from nowhere and instantly express everything he wants to express. He's living and learning right now, and he's wonderful.
And what do you think is the best thing for him to do right now in between albums?
Well, he's touring all the time. He's all over the world. He's just back from Australia and New Zealand. His records are platinum in both places. His sales are really phenomenal for a young, uncompromising artist. His two albums are well over 1 million together. And this is extraordinary without a single.
Do you stay in touch with him in between records?
Oh, sure. And his manager, Chesley, is a very good friend of mine, who's a nice guy and who's got a lot of integrity and who fights for his artists. And I love managers who fight for their artists, just the way John Landau fights for Bruce Springsteen.
Although there doesn't seem to be much reason to fight for Springsteen anymore.
No, not now. Well, Bruce has made it forever. God, his new album is well over 4 million, in America.
Huh. How much longer do you plan on working at Columbia, or as an active A&R man, as it were?
I don't know, until I drop dead, I guess, probably, and that probably won't be too long, because I go at a pretty hectic pace, as my poor assistant can assure you.
Well, I'm 26 years old, but you sound a lot more energetic than me.
Well, are you connected with Sony now?
No, I'm just a freelancer myself.
A freelancer, that's how. Do you write for Swing at all?
No, I write for other publications here.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm so glad to hear this and so glad to meet you. Is there anything else you'd like to ask me?
Well, if you have any messages for, say, the Japanese fans on Stevie, we'd appreciate it.
Well, I've only been to Japan twice, and that was both. They were both times was in 1970, and I loved the country. And I may not be able to get back there because I'm not allowed to fly anymore since I had heart failure in March. But who knows? Maybe the doctor will relent and let me go back. It's a wonderful country, and I saw a lot of the country itself. I wasn't only in Tokyo, but I was in Osaka and up in the mountains in the country, and it's just a beautiful country. I love the people.
What do you think they would like about Stevie?
Oh, because he's an honest musician, and he's an exciting musician, and the Japanese can really appreciate that. As a matter of fact, I've just made an album with a young Japanese classical singer, Nigi Sato, who is a superb musician. She went to Juilliard School of Music in New York, and half of the album is done just with the koto.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Was that your first experience with a Japanese artist?
Yes, it was.
And what did you think?
Well, I thought she's a marvelous musician. As a matter of fact, she's coming over to Japan in February, I believe it is. She's a nice woman. She's living in New York now. She's married to a very fine attorney here, and she has a lovely time.
Okay, well,
she's given concerts in Alice Tully Hall and Lincoln Center, and she's a really good musician.
Okay, I see. Well, I guess we got basically what we need. Can you hold on for a second?
Certainly.
Thank you very much.
Yes?
That's the man here at Epic Sony, Mr. Shimizu.
Oh, thank him, and I understand they've been doing a wonderful job with Stevie too, and both albums out in Japan now?
Yes, they are.
They are, that's fine. Are they both doing well?
Yeah, they appear to be doing somewhat well.
Only somewhat well. I say, well, as soon as they see him, they'll love him. It's just like before people saw Bruce, it was very hard to sell his albums, and as soon as they saw him, he became a monster on records.
That's right, that's right. Well, we do look forward to seeing Stevie, and if sometime in the future you could make it out here, that'd be great.
I would love to. All you have to do is to ask me.
Okay, well, we'll try to set something up.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Harris.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Hammond, and the best of luck to you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Hello, Mr. Harris.
Hello there.
I'm John Hammond.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Well, nice to meet you, too.
I've been
Are
asked...
you living in Tokyo?
pardon me?
Are you living in Tokyo now?
That's right.
Oh, that's great.
I've been asked by the staff of Epic Sony to do the interview, although
That's wonderful.
That's
great.
they have prepared the questions for me, so I guess I'll just fire away if you're ready.
All right, do that, please.
How did you get involved in producing Stevie Ray Vaughan?
He came to me about a little over 2 years ago. What happened was I heard the tape of his concert in Montreux with Stevie in Montreux 2 years ago, and they're friends, and it's all sort of incestuous, I guess, if that word is translatable to the Japanese.
It certainly is.
All right.
How about your son? What's he doing now, just out of curiosity?
Oh, he's playing all over the country. He's busier than he's ever been, I think.
Huh.
He's on the road right now.
I see. Getting back to Stevie, how did you feel about working with an artist whose age is quite a bit younger than you? Than yours?
Quite a bit younger. Well, I tell you, I'm not unused to it because I've been working with a lady who was in California.
How is it that you came to do Couldn't Stand the Weather?
Couldn't stand the weather. It was a terrible storm. This was last spring in New York, and the weather had been entirely terrible. And so Stevie, who was a sort of instant songwriter, wrote Couldn't Stand the Weather.
And what was your capacity in that recording?
I was the producer.
Which, in his case, would involve doing what? Like, what sort of advice and counsel did you give him?
Well, helping to pick the studio, balancing the musicians, telling them it was too loud, which is usually the case, and urging him to do as much live recording as possible. There's no tracking on this album. I mean, and I'm very proud of one thing, and that is that Tin Pan Alley, which is a 9-minute cut, was done on the first take live.
What sort of differences do you see between him and other young artists you've worked with?
Well, a lot. I mean, he's into the blues, and of course I've always been into the blues. I have a son who's a blues singer, and he was on the same program in the fall of 1982, and I was crazy about it, and so I was aware of him, and then his manager, Chesley Milliken, who used to work for Epic, and who was an old friend of mine, came over, and Stevie and I got along instantly. So he had a tape, and I thought it should be rebalanced, so I rebalanced it, and that was the first album. That was Texas Flood, and then I did the second album here in New York. The first album had been done originally, I think, mostly in California.